You again. I hope you had a very good first night in Ireland after probably a nice dinner and a nice beer, and you're back here for our first big event of the conference, our first keynote. And I'm very happy to introduce to you Hope Skippers. Hope Skippers, if you go on the internet, you find, of course, a lot of information about his truly extraordinary life journey. I would like to offer just a few points that might illustrate the perspective from which Hope will speak to us today. He has been literally everywhere. His biography shows an incredible broad profile, yet he can probably best be placed at the interface between music education and, I would say, cultural studies, world music, diversity, but also nowadays sustainability. And when he talks about sustainability, he always does it with a very close look at the cultural context. Performance training in sitar music led Hope to an interest in global music education and action research projects in Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. With partially overlapping careers in performance, education, research, journalism, the record trade, arts policy, and project management, he established and led the first World Music School in Amsterdam, founded in 1990, and later was the principal driver behind the World Music and Dance Center in Rotterdam. He has taught and lectured across the world. For example, 2022, he was invited to the UCLA as UC Regents Professor, and in 2023, he was the first visiting professor after COVID at the Central Conservatoire of Music in Beijing. At the moment, he's situated in Istanbul, so he's really around everywhere. I will only mention one, I think, very, very important publication of you. It's Facing the Music, Shaping Music Education from a Global Perspective, from 2010. Dear Hope, we're very curious about your thoughts. Very welcome.
Thank you very much. I don't think my mic is working. Is my mic working? Okay, my mic is working. Thank you very much. I'm always a little bit nervous when I'm invited to come and speak somewhere because either I'm very good at many things, as my biography shows, or I'm really bad at many things and I manage to escape before people find out. So I'm always a little bit apprehensive before I go somewhere. It was really nice to hear yesterday that this here was a lunatic asylum before, so if I say strange things, you know the place inspires me. I'm quite well known for saying challenging things, and yesterday somebody reminded me that I wrote an article 20 years ago for the International Society for Music Education called Blame It on the Germans, where I blame 5 Germans for everything that's wrong with music education. And you can imagine who they are. I mean, Hanslick, Herbart, Schenker, von Humboldt, of course, who separated research from musical practice. And Pestalozzi was kind of Swiss, but you just suggested Adorno. I can add him to the mix as well. You're all part of, first of all, I'm completely delighted that there's so many young people here, because sometimes we get tired of talking to ourselves. And also, you are going to be the ones that will shape the musical futures of people that live for the rest of this century. The thing I'm going to be talking about today is I'll create 12 provocations on how I think we are in transition and how we're constantly in transition. You've chosen a very complicated career. If you have a career in physics, there's a body of knowledge, and slowly we add a little bit to that body of knowledge. And the same goes for medicine and for law. With music education, we kind of have to reinvent ourselves with every generation. So much is changing, both conceptually and technically and demographically and socially, that what we used to think was true for the past generation is not necessarily true now. When I started planning this lecture, I was thinking, if Orff and Kodaly were alive today, how would they shape music education? Would we have the same Orff-Schulwerk system, and would we have the same Kodaly system of learning music? So what I did, and this actually comes from a telephone conversation with Patricia Campbell, who's one of my best friends and colleagues. We thought that if Karl Orff and Zoltan Kodaly meet today in the breakfast room of an Amsterdam hotel, the morning after they experience a 3-day World Children's Festival. And actually I used to run that World Children's Festival. With that fresh in their minds, how would Kodaly, who would be 42, and Orff, 29, I'm transposing them 1 century, reflect on what could help shape music education in the 3rd decade of the 21st century? I think it's a very interesting idea to think about transition and flexibility. So this is still in very early stages. In fact, Monday, Patricia's coming to Istanbul to work with me on making an article out of this. But I just wanted to share these loose thoughts with you. Zoltan saying, I couldn't sleep all night, Karl. Just kept thinking of the Samoan children's choirs who seem to be able to create 4-part harmonies on the spot around any melody. I've actually seen this happen. And what about the West African percussion groups? 7 to 10-year-olds playing multi-part rhythms and improvisations that would take me weeks to transcribe. And the gamelan workshop, 10-year-olds sounding like one in an ensemble of gongs with relatively simple individual parts, but an amazing sonic effect after 1 hour together. If you've ever done gamelan with kids, you know that this is true. Not to mention the beats the kids created with technology. Because how interesting would that have been for Kodaly? Karl answers, I know, Zoltan. I was equally impressed by the indigenous children who somehow embodied such a strong bond with their natural environment in song. And the teenage mariachi band, amazing abandon in music making. And what's this AI business? Seems rather promising to me, but kind of scary at the same time. I bet with what we've seen over the past few days, we could develop approaches to children learning music that would truly prepare them for finding their musical way within the rich diversity of sounds they have access to nowadays. I don't think this would be a strange dialogue for them to have at all. Very often we inherit these ideas from people from the past, and they only knew what they had around them, and they only had the concepts they had around them. And at the moment, the last 100 years, things have changed at absolutely breakneck speed. There's a few things that have not changed. Music plays an important role in the lives of all people and all cultures, which is really interesting because it is not one of the first life's needs. So we need to breathe, we need to feed, we need to procreate to keep the species going. But you'd never hear of a story of an old lady who was found alone in her flat and the doctor said she died from music deprivation. But yet everybody engages with music in one way or another. We also, quite amazingly, have the capacity to create meaning from complex patterns of sound. We're always very impressed that we have language. The fact that you're all sitting here and I'm speaking words and you can process those is amazing. If there was a symphony orchestra here, the signals that would come to you are infinitely more complex. And still, almost all humans are able to do this. According to Oliver Sacks in Musicophilia, which I would recommend, there is an affliction called amusia, which I think hits 1 in 200,000 people, including Darwin and Vladimir Nabokov, allegedly. And to them, a symphony orchestra would sound like a busy intersection in Dublin. So they would not make any sense of the connections between the sounds. But it's a very, very rare affliction. I'm working with the Amsterdam Music School again in 1990. I started there. They've hired me just to write their business plan for 25-28. And the entire population of Amsterdam is about 800,000 people. So there might be 4 people that we can't reach with music education in a sensible way. That's a risk we take. Another thing that you all know is that children have an innate capacity to listen to, move to, imitate, learn, and create music based on whatever musical and conceptual input is given to them from an early age. I experimented a lot with my daughter because I didn't need ethical clearance. So I exposed her to all kinds of music. And when she was 3.5 years old, she walked around with my first Walkman, because it was cassettes at that time, playing Bhimsen Joshi, Indian Khayal, playing gamelan, playing Turkish bağlama, playing opera, and young children up to about age 11 have no judgment on any of these things at all. It's all kind of music. Then, of course, teenage years comes and they narrow their taste to a very, very particular thing to create their identity. But then after they're 18, this sort of seems to open back up. What has changed? More children have more access to more music in more ways than ever before in the history of humankind. This is something that I think is really important to realize. While early music education was still based around the idea that a child came in as a blank slate and that you would put musical information in them, our 3-year-olds and our 6-year-olds come in with so much musical knowledge and so much musical baggage already that it would be quite silly not to use that in order to shape their musical careers or their musical development further. Another thing that has changed, at least in rhetoric, is that the colonial hierarchy of musics is increasingly rejected, so that some musics may really no longer be more equal than others. Music education in the West and in the tradition that most of you have learned in started from the idea that there was a hierarchy of musics. The music of Mahler and Wagner is best, and then the hierarchy is determined of how much you are like Mahler or Wagner. Which is scientifically a really, really bad bit of research. Because if you put Taylor Swift, I was just making this up, if you put Taylor Swift at the top of the thing, then Mahler is mediocre music, because it's not very much like Taylor Swift. It's more like Taylor Swift than gamelan, but it's less than Taylor Swift and then, let's say, folk music from the Balkans. So it's very interesting to see how you can make any music be the best possibly. My very first book was 40 years ago in 1984, and in it I put forward that Western music, this was about Indian classical music, which is my background. This was to introduce people that like Western music to Indian classical music and to listen to it with the ears that you need for that music. And I put the sentence in there saying that Indian classical music is not bad Western music, just like Western classical music is not bad Indian classical music. Because Indian ragas are very bad Mahler, but Mahler is terrible Indian ragas. I mean, he gets everything wrong from a raga perspective. So he's way down the hierarchy there. So many people believe that all musics are equal, but what we're seeing in education, in the practice, almost everywhere in the world, including in China, where I was, that Western music is still seen as superior because of our colonial past. I'd be the last person to deny that Western music has produced some really nice tunes. But it's not necessarily the best music in the world, because I don't know how to compare the beauty of Indian ragas or of Azerbaijani mugams or of polyphonies in Burundi with the music of Wagner or Mahler or Bach. Let's go to a slightly better composer. I have no judgment about anything, as you can see. But what I'm trying to make clear is that we have to be able to switch positions more and more in order to really understand things. But we also have to understand that our institutionalized way of doing things makes things go from generation to generation to generation. And in music education, we can't really afford that anymore because the world of music is changing so rapidly. So you as educators are constantly faced with new sounds, new technologies, and ways to engage with and learn music. And I looked through the program, and I'm going to stay for for most of it. And I was really delighted how many presentations there are on AI. Do we know exactly what AI is going to do in music or music education? We don't. Do we know it's going to be incredibly important? We definitely do. So let's engage with it, and let's try and work with it in a responsible manner. So what are our main challenges? How do we truly integrate the current diversity of approaches to creating, learning, moving to, performing, experiencing, and sharing music into the classroom experience? That is a very, very big and complicated agenda, which I'll try to unpick a little bit. And the other thing that I think we need to think about is, and I see some presentations about this as well, to what extent do we feel responsible for music education to respond to the pressing issues in the world around us, like nationalism, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and sustainability? we come from a past where music was seen as, in an ivory tower, as something quite remote from the world. I've never quite understood how that works, because I don't know of no music in the world that doesn't relate to people. So however beautiful music is, it's always written or played or conceived in some way in relation to people. But now, as music educators and as educators in general, we have so many complicated things happening in the world. And to what extent should music education engage with that? Shall we just say music education is just musical sounds and we just don't deal with all this bullshit? Or did I use that word in a lecture? Or we can say music education is part of society and engages with people. So in what way can we make that work in the most effective manner? Yesterday, when I came here, I had no idea who you were going to be. And I created a presentation which was quite challenging at a very basic level. But then I saw you and I said, wow, this is a group of people that are very open-minded. I can make this a little bit more, a bit stronger. So this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, I rewrote my entire lecture. So you won't be the first. It's not only you that will hear it for the first time, I will hear it for the first time as well. What I try to do is to illustrate the idea of traditions in transition through 12 major conceptual shifts that we are part of. The first one that I want to mention is going from a colonized curriculum based on the illusion that there's a single superior music culture to an awareness that all of us live in a world of infinite musical richness based on very diverse value systems. I'd learned Indian classical music for 20 years, and I came from a family of opera lovers. My father was working for a record company, for Philips and Deutsche Grammophon, so I heard every opera before I was born. You start hearing operas about 4 months before you're born, so I pretty much heard all the operas before I was born. And then you start to learn Indian classical music and you find a completely different value system underlying it. To me, this was absolutely mind-blowing and eye-opening, and it actually inspired a lot of my path from there. We've been looking at music from other cultures in many, many different ways. We've used many terms for people that came into our countries from other places, beyond the racist slurs that we're all familiar with. We used guest workers, migrant workers, Gastarbeiter, there's many Germans here, foreigners, newcomers, people with migration background is currently popular. A pattern, by the way, which is quite similar to the evolution of how we have been looking at LGBTQ+ people. The music of people from away, and this term came from, I was in Cape Breton working with indigenous people there, and the people of Scottish descent who've been there for a little while, for 400 years, that when you come from a little bit further away, you are from away. And just before that, I was in North Carolina working with old-time and bluegrass music, and they had the same idea that if you even come from a different county, you're a foreigner, let alone if you're coming from further away. So there's this xenophobic idea in all of us. So we've been referring to music from away as ethnic music, folk music. The BBC had a program called Strange Music in the 1940s or 50s. We've been talking about non-Western music, which is also quite funny. A famous tabla player, Anish Pradhan in India, calls the music of Bach non-Indian music, which makes equal sense. We've been referring to global music, which has advantages and disadvantages, and then there was the term world music, which was quite popular in the 90s and now is beginning to lose its sheen, because also it makes no particular sense. Very rarely do we refer to music as just music, and in academic disciplines, musicology is reserved for the study of Western art music, and the study of all other music is ethnomusicology, which wrongly suggests a very strong relationship between ethnic groups and musics, which is no longer sustainable at all. Charles Seeger, the uncle of one of my mentors, Tony Seeger, argued for this very eloquently already more than 60 years ago, but it seems to be a long path to talk about all music research as just music research rather than linking it to a particular ethnic groups. Now when we talk about addressing inequalities, we very often use the term equity, diversity, and inclusion, and they have some different variations in different places. As music educators, I think we need to at least be aware that the world's divided into two camps internationally, and we see these camps getting more and more extreme. Those that want to keep things the same and under control, and those who are ready to embrace the changes around us. You're all the second category, undoubtedly. The first category really exists, and it's becoming a very large part of people. The Netherlands, where I come from, has always had a tradition of tolerance, although very often it was tolerance in relation to capitalism. So we took in the French Huguenot and the German Jews because they brought business with them, not just because we liked them so much. But what we're seeing is that my feeling, I was having a discussion about that in Canada just now. My feeling is that there's so many people that feel that they don't have control anymore over their lives because they can't trust the media anymore, because of technology taking over their world, because things getting more diverse, getting more complicated, that they want to go back to some kind of dreamed past of simplicity and clarity. And I think many of those people, these are the people that voted for Brexit, and these are the people that voted for Wilders in the Netherlands, who got 20 cent, who became the biggest party with an agenda that involved burning all Qurans in the Netherlands, which is contrary to our constitution. And we see this move to the right in many places, and the move to dictatorships. I'm sure that you get little bits of news about Trump sometimes. It seems completely and utterly ridiculous, but the people that believe in Trump are the people that want to have somebody who has got a clear voice, who says, we're going to do it like this. And that's not great for democracy, and it's not great for the world. And in music education, we deal with that world because the children of those people are in our classrooms. Second concept, I'll go a bit faster now. We had a focus on a standardized legacy material as the material that we wanted to transmit. And we're shifting to finding an inspiring range of living musical practices that can help us prepare children for a fulfilling musical life on their own terms. A lot of this has to do with institutionalization. I must have done something really bad in my previous lives because I hate large organizations, and for more than 30 years I've had leadership positions in large organizations. And large organizations come from a community desire. So music education was organized because the community said we need to have music education. There's nothing wrong with that, but what we see with organizations is after 10 years or 20 years or 2 or 3 generations, instead of following their passion, which is let's prepare students for a life in music, their own survival becomes more important to them than their mission. And this is a big problem in large organizations. I've also written about this in different places. And conservatoires were started with the best intentions. It's also important to know that in the time of Bach and Mozart, there were no conservatoires. So the first one was 1989, I think, in the Conservatoire de Paris. And then the 1910s, so 1899, and then Conservatoire de Paris and Berlin and Vienna started in the 1910s, 1920s. So only when orchestral music became quite complicated, they started having these conservatoires. And the Conservatoire de Paris had 2 different branches. One was to train musicians to play the more complicated symphonic music that was there, and the other was to train girls to be ready for nice husbands. So if you could write in the wedding ad, plays the piano, that would be very nice for the tired doctor or lawyer or whatever coming back to his home. I worked with my teacher in India, did the same thing in India. So in India, if you saw the wedding ads in the Times of India, it has some musical skills, which would put a girl higher up in the wedding market at that time. Where are those times? So with this came a shift, comes a shift, and we're part of a shift from static views of tradition to much more dynamic ones, acknowledging that it's inherent in most traditions to continually change with changing circumstances. And yesterday's Lorraine and some of the other speakers were already mentioning that traditions are not things that stay the same. A few religious traditions and institutional traditions are like that, but most music traditions have never been like that. There's also the idea of authenticity, which has become very important, particularly when you play with what's now called historically informed tradition. Was called authentic practice when it just came up, and I was there in the Netherlands, which was one of the centers. And we found that the claim, it's overclaiming a bit to say it's authentic, because we really have no idea how things sounded that long ago. Also, authentic means two completely different things. So an authentic performance of 16th century music tries to sound as much as the original as possible, while an authentic rock musician plays as little as anybody else as possible. So the very idea of authentic is so ambiguous that it's not particularly useful and more paralyzing than helpful. A similar situation happens with context. We've been trying to strive to recreate contexts as much as possible when we play traditional musics, but we don't realize that most musics recontextualize very, very easily. When we hear Bach's St. Matthew's Passion in Sydney Opera House, it's been recontextualized very, very drastically from its original 18th century meaning into 21st century meaning. And Indian ragas went from temples and mosques into courts, into middle-class audiences, into international audiences, and all of those different contexts have left traces, but most musics travel really quite well. They go from one place to another quite well, and everything we do in the classroom is recontextualized. I wouldn't say decontextualized, which some people say, that it has no context. Of course it has a context. You're sitting there with these children in class, you're doing something. It's a new context. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's something really weird with the West. You work in music, and you probably meet people regularly that say, oh, you work in music, I'm not musical at all. Which is such a weird concept, because when I've traveled to Africa or to Latin America or to Asia, nobody ever says that to me. So we've created such a narrow concept of what it is to be musical. So if you're musical, you're a composer, or you play the violin really well and you read music. And if you don't do any of those things, then you're not musical. So at the time of the CDs, sometimes I would say to people, oh, you're really not musical at all. Then let me exchange your CD collection for that of my grandmother, and you'll be fine with that. They will kill me if I do that. Because everybody is musical, as we discussed before, but the perception of musicality and creativity has been really done terrible harm to in the West. My niece, I'm very proud that my niece Annemaartje Lemerijs is the composer laureate of the Netherlands for this 4-year period. And she believes, and she's very passionate about education, and she believes that every single child is a composer. Which is true, and you find this in your work. And why does this go wrong? Because we tell them they're not. So what I'm observing is that until age about 10, children are creative with music, and then they learn that real music is made by Mozart or by Taylor Swift, and that they are not the people who make real music. I deliberately forgot to tell my daughter this, and we kept singing songs and making up songs. Have any of those won Eurovision Song Festival? Maybe not. But have we had fun making them? Definitely. It's such a horrible thing that we do to children to remove the idea that they are creative from their awareness, conceptual awareness. Just like in many northwestern European countries, we take away the ability to move from children because they are not real dancers. So this is a horrible, horrible thing that we do, and we don't need to do this at all. This is not a question of having to do something, it's not doing something. Next few concepts. We learned, and this was partly by these horrible Germans that I mentioned before. I know there's many Germans in the call, willkommen. We had the idea that musical complexity first has to be divided into equally digestible bits and then put together again in order to have people play music. If you look at how children learn music, that's actually not how they learn music at all. It's not that Taylor Swift sings one song, one line of a song, and then repeats it 10 times so that everybody can have it, and then this next one, they hear the entire song, and they hear the entire song 5 times, or 10 times, or 20 times, and then they've got the entire song, including the balance between the different parts. I've argued in many conferences that we underestimate confusion as a pedagogical tool. Not everything has to be logical and easy, and actually it is more boring if it's easy. It's much more difficult to have a group of children clap 4/4, which is boring, very boring, than to have them clap an 8.5 beat rhythm from India, which goes D, na, D, D, na, T, na, D, D, na, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5, 1. So this is much easier to do for children because it's interesting. They have to think while they're doing this. So we know that confusion triggers, what are they called? The synapses. Triggers the synapses, and when the synapses are triggered, more learning takes place. Sadly, this is also true from hitting students. So your grandmother's Russian piano teacher, who hit her on the fingers with a ruler, was actually pedagogically right when she did that. I've argued everywhere, and somehow nobody follows me. Why don't we start hitting our students again? Because it's very effective. The reason why we don't hit our students, this is just my theory, is that it does harm to them, to their minds. And I've seen many musicians, Indian musicians, who've learned like this, and their minds were not great. Confusion doesn't harm your mind. Confusion is how we learn things. And I think sometimes we can ask much more from our students than we're doing, thinking that everything has to be logical and logically built up. We've been working a lot from didactic models based on master-disciple and we see that that's shifting now towards more democratic models with facilitators and or peer-to-peer learning. The teacher who knows it all and tells everything and the children who know nothing is just not the model that works anymore. We've seen people rejecting, and yesterday somebody was referring to that new technology is scary to us. I was born before computers. I was actually born before TV was common. So before computers existed, we have to learn these things. Do we want to learn these things? It doesn't really matter, but if we want to be effective with the kids that we're working with, we have to at least have some understanding of how things work, including AI, which is going to transform everything. Music education, as we inherited it, had a very singular focus on learning repertoire and skills. And slowly we see a greater sense of social justice, including diversity and inclusion and cultural sustainability. And this brings me back to what I was mentioning earlier, that we are part of a society. We know that access to music education is considerably lower amongst minorities and socially disadvantaged groups worldwide. This is partly because very much good music education has to do with lots of money, and usually they're not close to money. But it also has to do that we alienate musicians from other backgrounds. I was doing research in Western Sydney in Australia, and we were at a school where there were a lot of Samoan kids who actually Kodaly referred to. And their teacher came in and he just sang one song that he liked, the Do Run Run, old 1960s, 70s songs, and they harmonized it immediately into 4-part harmony, absolutely perfectly. And why could they do that? Because they also do that at home and they do it in the church. But then I asked them, so, and how do you like your music lessons? And they said, music lessons? We don't take music lessons. Music is boring. This is a terrible thing. If we can be seen amongst very musical kids to be boring, that's a real mistake that we're making. There's a lot of music that has to do with fighting for social justice. I used to run a record label called Smithsonian Folkways in Washington, D.C., and we had things like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and Lead Belly, who all sang important songs to change the world. These are great songs to tell children how music influences the world. Pete Seeger himself said, if I write a manifesto, people might read it once and sort of remember, oh, that was nice. If I write a song, then everybody will remember it forever. So songs are very, very important in changing the world. Sadly, they're also important in changing the world for the worse. There's also terrible racist songs which persist for many generations. Music is not always good. Music education is also related to cultural sustainability in many ways. And if you are, I was in the Appalachian Mountains a month ago, working with bluegrass and old-time music, as I mentioned, and they very deliberately get school children to work with the old musicians on the porch to learn what their musical background is. And that empowers them so much, because the Appalachians are seen as the losers of America, because they're not very highly educated, the industry has left the area, so they're quite poor. And by going to a musician and experiencing this musician, telling him how he learned his music from his father and from his grandfather, empowers them in a wonderful way. So yes, music is global, but there's still many local traditions that are very meaningful for children. So if there was ever a time where we could imagine a child developing along a straight line from musical ignorance to musical mastery, I think that time has passed. We have to catch them way before birth if we want to find a blank slate kid. It's much more realistic to see every young child at the center of a circle of possibilities with myriad possible directions for becoming a fulfilled musical citizen of this planet. That would be an argument to give every child an introduction to musical concepts from many practices and cultures, and then support them to develop in any of those in the way that suits them best, with multiple entry and exit points. With music schools, less so with music in schools, but with music schools and with conservatoires, we have this idea that you have to become a professional musician, and if you are not, then you're a failure. About 3% of the people that graduate from big conservatoires find the job as soloist or as small ensemble member or as orchestral member or in an opera company that they are hoping for. I'm not ready to see that the other 97% as failures. They might even not finish their degree, but they might be happy musical citizens in many, many different ways. When I was running the Queensland Conservatorium in Brisbane, instead of celebrating the inevitable people that sang with Placido Domingo in the Met, we actually celebrated the people that ran community choirs in Rockhampton, or that worked with old people in one of the aged care homes, because they're all successful people coming out of musical careers, including the people that just love listening to music. These are all people, if we open their ears to a wide range of music and then later they choose what they want to do at whatever level and whenever, this is all fine. Reaching this can involve using orality or notation, didactic teaching or peer-to-peer learning, short-term or long-term orientation, acoustic or IT-based work, or a combination of those. That's a lot of ideas that I just spread over you in about 25 minutes. Is it easy to live up to all of those ideas? No, it's really not easy at all. As I told you before, your discipline is more difficult than many, many other disciplines. It's one thing to agree with the idea that every music teacher should be able to guide every child in the classroom flawlessly on any individual learning path that leads into any of thousands of directions, but it's another thing entirely to know how to do this. And probably nobody, none of you, and certainly I don't, have those skills. Which it might be one of the reasons that things have progressed very slowly over the past half century, because in 1967 there was the, what was it called again? I've got it here, my brain, Tanglewood. The Tanglewood Declaration, which is interesting to look at, which said that music from all different cultures and youth culture and avant-garde music should be included in music education. But things have moved rather slowly since then, because it's very hard for a music teacher to feel that they have the confidence to be able to do all these different things. Because you may be a specialist on Western classical music and maybe also on tango or on African percussion, but how can you be a specialist in everything? You can't. So you need to find clever ways of dealing with things. And some of our colleagues, most notably Patricia Campbell with her World Music Pedagogy, has come up with very clever ways of introducing music from other cultures without having to be an expert on it. So it's understandable that we have lack of confidence, that we feel insecure, but I don't think it's an excuse any longer. It's really time that things change. Music education has to face contemporary realities in order to stay relevant. One of the things I've noticed working with children, and you may have noticed this as well, is that they are not stupid. Children are very, very clever. They actually know if you're faking it or if it's real, what you're offering them. And if you do something that you don't believe or doesn't work with them, it's really, really hard to keep a class interesting. So if we truly are a tradition in constant transformation, as the title of this conference suggests, we can make a substantial difference by concrete action in 5 different areas. We should collaborate much more with those outside of music education. In community music, there's some beautiful models that we can use in the classroom, which we rarely use. In other music traditions, there's some wonderful ways of making music. In music technology, which we discussed already. Incredibly important is to reshape new teacher training. And as I hear some stories of where that's happening already, which I'm really happy about. We keep turning out music and school teachers who are ill-equipped for the realities now because they learn from people that learned 40 years ago, who learned from people who learned 40 years before that. So we really have to be right in the world. And I think in Germany there's a lot of movement going on. In the Netherlands there is. But in many places, and like I work in America, where music education tends to be quite old-fashioned. We have to do a lot of research in many things, and we have to do good research. There's a lot of very poor research going on in music education. Part of the research is in embracing emerging technologies and using and developing material and methods to support constructive use of these resources. They may be the gateway to the musics that you don't know very well. With Smithsonian Folkways, the record label, we created something that's going to be launched very soon. You've heard it here first, called Music Pathways, where we take a theme, a social theme, and use music from the Latin Revolution movement, or from Black Lives Matter, or from indigenous rights, to illustrate how the music there interacts with these social themes. These are things that are very easy to use in the classroom and even independently online. And they give you an access to a kind of work that you don't have the time to do the research for. Another thing that's really important is to give children opportunities who otherwise would never get the chance and make them feel more connected to the world. There are many children that would love to have music education and they don't get it. My wife and I are working in southeast Turkey, where the terrible earthquake took place in February last year. And all the children there have lost people very close to them. Many of them have seen dead people, they've seen buildings collapse around them, and their schools have collapsed as well, so they're in container schools now. We are trying to gather as much power and energy and money to help those kids get the best musical education they can get, partly to help them recover from to reconnect to the sense of community, to the sense of place, to a basic sense of well-being. Because music can be a very powerful thing to bring back people into a sense of rightness. And finally, we also have to put the exhaustingly multifaceted, confused, distracted children of today at the center of our efforts. I'm not idealizing children at all. I'm actually against children having access to mobile digital devices before age 10, because I've seen fantastic results when that's not happened, but most of them do. And we are battling with a lot of distractions. And these are realities we need to do with, so we have to be more interesting than the distractions. So, in conclusion, our job is both very simple and infinitely complicated. We aim to empower children to discover, develop, and enjoy their musical identities in a world with myriad technological, cultural, and educational options, as well as many distractions. We are most likely to be successful if we do this in the same spirit that our founders, like Orff and Kodaly, and predecessors approached it, by listening to new ideas, to new sounds, to new technologies, and especially to the children we inspire to become musical citizens for the rest of the 21st century. Because that's what you're doing. The children that you're teaching now, you will determine their musical lives until the very end of this century, given that their life expectancy is probably close to 100. That's a big ask, and please keep doing it with an open mind and having fun and talk to each other. Thank you very much. This is the book that many of these ideas come from, and Patricia Campbell is doing a lecture on how you reach children through music online next week, which I'll be happy to give information for. I'll be here for most of the rest of the conference. Please come and say hello to me and talk to me and give your ideas to me and say how stupid my ideas are. I really want to have as much dialogue with everybody as possible. I look much more scary than I am in real life. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Hope. This was really a big picture that you painted, and I'm sure there will be people wanting to ask things or comment. We have now the possibility for another 10 minutes, I would say, to pick up questions from your side or comments. We have microphones here and are happy to hear your voices. Is there somebody raising the hand? Still thinking? Yes? No? Yes? So.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk, and thinking about the same concepts. Could you elaborate on cultural appropriation, what you think about that?
Yes, I can. Complicated topic. I work with Indian musicians. When they hear Western musicians playing Indian ragas on piano, which sounds quite bad, they never talk about appropriation. Because in India, first Indians think that their music is better than anybody else's music, just like Westerners do. So the idea of appropriation is not really relevant to them. We mostly hear appropriation in relation to people that are suppressed, have been colonized and are suppressed. Indigenous people mostly in different places. Many of the indigenous people are very happy if you use their music, but if you use it in a context that's sensitive and that recognizes where it comes from, because they do. So when I hear indigenous musicians in Australia or in Canada or in Asia, they will take the music from other people, but they recognize it. They say this comes from these people, and if you're in a situation like I was in Australia, you ask permission. Can I use this music from you? Just taking random bits of music and using them randomly, it just requires sensitivity. Interestingly, indigenous people in Australia, the older generation, they all play country music. And I asked actually one of them for fun, said, so did you ask Hank Williams if you could use this song? But so people feel that people appropriate their music, but they also appropriate other people's music. Rap and hip hop was a fantastic example. So when rap started in 1973, it started appropriating all these beats from recordings. And they said, oh, everything should be free for everybody. But then I tried to make a box set with the history of hip-hop and rap, and I had 600 lawyers of the rap artists to deal with that, to say that this belongs to me, you can't use any of this. So it's a very contradictory field, but we cannot afford to be insensitive about this. Many people, indigenous people have been, and colonized people and enslaved people have been abused for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we need to talk to them and listen to them. But I find most people to be very gracious if you deal with it in an appropriate way. But good question, thank you.
Go on, somebody else. Yes, over here, 2 people. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the inspiring talk. I would like to ask you about your opinion about the structural issues, because I'm an immigrant person in Germany, so one of these people that you were talking about, and you actually live in my actual hometown. And when I look at the academia in music education, even though we talk about diversity and inclusion and cultural democracy, what I still see is mostly people, mostly white people, heterosexual, cisgender, and mostly, especially in Germany, or at least what I see is the males. So, how to change this? What is your opinion about it? Because how do we give the opportunity to the people to tell their own story instead of the other individuals of the dominant culture tell their stories? What is your opinion about that?
I think as institutions, we are not sufficiently welcoming people. So we have a history which we can't help, so that's our history. We inherit that history. But with our history comes a radiance of music teachers are female and white, and they are into Western classical music, just to give a completely ridiculous picture of it. If we don't give the impression that you're welcome as another person, and also if you're not welcome as another person. So we had, at Rotterdam Conservatory, where I worked, where I set up the World Music and Dance Center, we had many of the great Suriname musicians coming in, who were amazing arrangers for choir, but in order to get their teacher certificate, they had to analyze a Mozart sonata. And so these were people that were incredibly good at their music, or incredibly great Indian musicians, but as an Indian musician, you have to be able to improvise on raga structures. You don't have to analyze a Mozart sonata. So the idea that in the rules of our institutions, even if we say we have cultural democracy, we have EDI, if you look carefully at both what we radiate and what our structure of rules is, there's many things that are obstacles. And one of the things I'm doing now is to help institutions to try and remove those obstacles, to actually look at their rules and say, okay, here I am, I'm a Turkish balama player, I'm coming into your institution, I would love to become a music educator. What are the things that I need to do? Well, you need to read staff notation, and you need to play the piano, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. And immediately you create barriers which are not necessary. So the piano it's a great instrument in some ways. I have my reservations about the piano because of equal temperament. I think equal temperament is a terrible concession to musicality, but that's not a very widely held vision. But piano is not everything. For many musics with microtonal intervals, it's terrible, and it actually spoils the ears of people working in those musics. Yesterday you saw the pipe player. I went up to him, I said, "You've learned from an old master." He said, "Yes, I did." I said, "You don't learn to play like that at a conservatory." So there's something when you learn with masters where there's timbre issues, intonation issues, rhythm issues, expression issues, which are very, very hard to transfer into a conservatory environment. And when the conservatory environment doesn't have the humility to acknowledge that that is a problem, then we will not resolve this. Some places do. I mean, the World Music and Dance Center in Rotterdam takes people in, and we had to fight as well. So my predecessor, Jobor, had to fight with the inspector and said, why do you give Indian raga theory, and why don't you give German as a language, but Hindi as a language? Because Indian musicians are more served with Hindi than with German. Wonderful as your language is. So we have many steps to take, and we need to really confront ourselves and say, we want to do this, but now we're going to look very carefully at our systems and at what we radiate and how we go out to people. In the Amsterdam Music Southeast, there's an after-school program, and they go and talk to the parents if they want a child to do there. It's not that the child doesn't want to play, but the parents don't see the need for it. So they actually have social workers going to the parents and saying, this is really good for your child if they participate in this. Because not everybody comes from an upper middle class white background. And our entire music education system is still based on accommodating people from upper class white backgrounds, cisgender, all the things that you mentioned. Hard work.
A question is possible, and then we have Lorraine. Okay.
Thank you so much. It was really inspiring. I was just curious, you're talking about the internalized colonization that a lot of people have that reduces their confidence to lead music effectively with children and young people. And I'm curious, from the work that you've done and what you've seen in your own experiences, what does it look like, tangible skills and competencies that the best music educators have when they're working with children and young people? If I walked into a session and you said, this person knows what they're doing, and they're doing it really well, and they're subverting all of these power structures, what does that actually look and feel like?
Look at the work of Jennifer Walden, who's been in the international school circus forever. She's doing some amazing work. There's a program called Ethno from Jeunesse Musicale, where they have young people teaching each other without any teachers, called Ethno, a horrible name for the program. But it's a completely peer-to-peer learning system, where you see no hierarchies, where you see no going back to structures that are not needed for transmitting the music, and every student becomes a teacher. I think this is one of the big, particularly when you're working in secondary schools, almost every student has enough musical baggage to become the teacher. And then we become the facilitators. We step back and we allow this to happen, and when we see something can be facilitated, we can help. It's hard to step back from what we've inherited. And this is not our fault. This is just something that we need to do. But the awareness that we have and the ability to step back is really important. But it's a very slow process. Working thematically can work. So I've started projects called Drumming Around the World, where people go into schools and they drum, and they don't even talk about context. The kids get inspired by the drumming. And then their questions come from, where does this come from? How does it work? So sometimes turning around the process works really well, but it's hard. And I think all of us are still struggling to get there. But there are more and more good practices to see, and you can find them on the internet. And if you come and talk to me, I can help you in a few directions.
I will ask you now for another applause. Wait a minute, because don't leave the room after applauding. We listen to Lorraine before we go out of the room. So first of all, thank you very much once again, and so happy that you stay with us. There will be a lot of discussions going on until Saturday, and it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.